There comes a quiet moment in life when the noise fades, the drama doesn't hook you, the chaos doesn't thrill you. The things that once made your heart race now barely register. And for a while you wonder, what's wrong with me? Why don't I feel excited anymore? But here's the truth no one tells you. Nothing is wrong. You're not broken. You're maturing. This isn't emptiness. This is feminine maturity. The moment your soul stops chasing sparks and starts choosing peace. Let's talk about what that really means. There comes a point where the noise that once felt alive starts to feel heavy, not dramatic, not exciting, just loud. And you don't notice it all at once. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly in moments you used to crave but now endure. A late night argument that once made your heart race now makes your shoulders tense. A relationship that thrives on uncertainty no longer feels romantic. It feels exhausting. You sit there and realize something has changed inside you, and for a moment, that realization scares you. Because chaos used to feel like proof you were alive. You were taught, subtly and repeatedly, that intensity equals passion. That love is supposed to hurt a little. That excitement lives in unpredictability. So when calm enters your life, it doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels empty. It feels boring. And you start asking yourself if you've lost something important, something essential, something that made you you. But you haven't lost anything. You've outgrown something. Chaos has a way of convincing you it's necessary. It speaks loudly. It demands attention. It keeps your nervous system on high alert, mistaking adrenaline for connection. When you're younger, that rush feels intoxicating. Your body learns it. Your emotions memorize it. The ups and downs, the highs and crashes, the waiting, the wondering, your system starts to believe that's what love, excitement, and meaning are supposed to feel like. Science backs this up. When we live in emotional unpredictability for long periods, our brains adapt. Cortisol and dopamine become familiar companions. Stress and reward start dancing together. The uncertainty makes the good moments feel stronger, sharper, more valuable. So you cling to the chaos, not because it's good for you, but because it's familiar. Then something shifts. Maybe it's after one disappointment too many. Maybe it's after you finally leave something that drained you. Or maybe it's just time doing what time always does, teaching you through quiet repetition. Suddenly, your body doesn't respond the same way. The chaos doesn't spark curiosity. It sparks fatigue. Your chest doesn't flutter, it tightens. Your mind doesn't race with excitement. It looks for an exit. And calm walks in. Calm doesn't shout. It doesn't seduce you with drama. It doesn't beg to be chosen. It just sits there steady and unremarkable, asking nothing from you except presence. At first it feels wrong, too still, too quiet, like something is missing. That's because calm doesn't stimulate the wounds you've already healed. Peace doesn't feel exciting to a nervous system that's been trained on survival. It feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can feel boring before it feels safe. You don't realize at first that what you're experiencing isn't dullness, it's withdrawal. Withdrawal from chaos, from emotional addiction, from the constant need to be activated just to feel something. Think about how many people leave healthy relationships saying, "It's nice, but I don't feel the spark." What they often mean is, my body isn't in fight or flight anymore, and I don't know how to interpret that. They confuse stability with stagnation because no one ever taught them the difference. Real calm doesn't rush you. It doesn't demand you prove your worth. It doesn't keep you guessing where you stand. And when you've lived most of your life bracing for impact, that level of safety can feel unsettling. Your system keeps waiting for the drop that never comes. You scan for problems that aren't there. You almost miss the chaos because at least chaos gave you something to react to. But reaction is not the same as fulfillment. There's a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, where you realize you're not bored, you're resting. For the first time in a long time, your body isn't bracing. Your mind isn't rehearsing conversations or preparing defenses. You're not checking your phone for validation or waiting for the next emotional spike. You're just here, That moment is uncomfortable for people who haven't met themselves yet. Silence has a way of introducing you to your own thoughts. And when chaos leaves, there's nowhere left to hide, no distraction, no drama to blame, just you, your breath, and the truth of how you feel. This is where many people turn back. They mistake the discomfort of stillness for emptiness. They re-enter chaotic cycles because at least those cycles feel familiar. But if you stay, if you allow yourself to sit in the calm without judging it, something powerful begins to happen. Your nervous system starts to reset. Research shows that prolonged exposure to safety and predictability rewires the brain. Heart rate stabilizes, stress hormones decrease, emotional regulation improves. You stop reacting impulsively. You start responding intentionally. The calm that once felt boring starts to feel grounding. And then one day, you notice something subtle but profound. Your standards have changed. You no longer tolerate emotional whiplash just to feel desired. You no longer romanticize inconsistency. You don't need someone to shake your world to earn a place in it. You begin to value people who bring clarity, not confusion. Conversations that feel honest, not charged. Moments that feel steady, not performative. You realize that peace doesn't thrill you because it doesn't need to. It supports you. It holds you. It allows you to grow without bleeding for it. And that's when calm reveals its true nature. Calm isn't boring. Calm is spacious. It gives you room to hear your intuition instead of drowning it out with noise. It allows you to recognize red flags without being blinded by excitement. It helps you see people as they are, not as the potential you projected onto them during emotional highs. You start to notice how much energy chaos used to take, how tired you were all the time, how often you confused being emotionally drained with being emotionally invested. You see it clearly now, without bitterness, without regret, just awareness. Awareness changes everything. You move differently. You speak more slowly. You choose more carefully. You don't rush connections. You don't chase intensity. You don't need constant stimulation to feel alive. Life becomes less about sparks and more about substance. And yes, there will be moments when calm still feels strange, when you wonder if you've become too serious, too reserved, too detached. But then you remember how it felt to live in constant emotional motion, how heavy that was, how unsustainable. And you understand that what you gained is worth far more than what you left behind. You didn't lose passion. You refined it. You didn't lose excitement. You learned discernment. Calm didn't dull you. It stabilized you. It gave you a foundation strong enough to hold real joy, real love, real connection without the cost of chaos. And once you experience that kind of peace, you don't crave the storm anymore. You recognize it from a distance. You respect what it taught you. And you keep walking forward, grounded, present, and quietly powerful, knowing that calm isn't the absence of life, but the place where life finally has room to breathe. There was a time when a single look could change your entire day. One message, one compliment, one moment of attention from the right person, and suddenly you felt seen, energized, alive. It wasn't shallow, it was human. We are wired to connect, to belong, to feel chosen. In the beginning, external validation felt like oxygen. You breathed it in without thinking, without questioning where it came from or what it cost you. And then, slowly, something changed. You didn't stop appreciating kindness. You didn't become cold or indifferent. But the reaction inside you softened. Praise no longer lifted you into the air. Criticism no longer knocked the wind out of you. Approval didn't define your worth the way it once did. At first, this shift felt confusing, almost unsettling. You wondered if you were losing your sensitivity, your warmth, your spark. But you weren't losing anything. You were reclaiming something. External validation works like a mirror. When you don't yet recognize yourself, you depend on reflections. You look outward to understand who you are, how valuable you might be, how much space you're allowed to take up in the world. And there's no shame in that. Growth often begins with permission, and many of us first learn our worth by seeing it acknowledged by someone else. But mirrors can distort, they can exaggerate, they can shatter. When validation comes from outside, it's fragile by nature. It depends on moods, opinions, availability. One day you're admired, the next you're ignored. And if your sense of self is tied to that fluctuation, your inner world becomes just as unstable. You rise and fall based on reactions you can't control. You may not have noticed how exhausting that was until it stopped working. There comes a moment when praise lands, but it doesn't anchor itself. It passes through you instead of defining you. Someone tells you you're impressive, beautiful, desirable, and instead of clinging to it, you simply nod, grateful but unmoved. You don't need to store it away for later survival. You don't need it to hold yourself together. This is the moment many people misinterpret as detachment. But detachment isn't what's happening. Independence is. Psychology tells us that as emotional maturity develops, the brain shifts from external reward systems toward internal regulation. Dopamine-driven validation loses its grip, and something quieter takes its place. Self-trust, not arrogance, not indifference, just a grounded sense of, I know who I am even when no one is watching. You stop asking, consciously or unconsciously, do they approve of me? And you start asking, do I approve of myself here? That question changes everything. You begin to notice how often you used to perform, how many choices were shaped by how they would look instead of how they would feel, how often you bent yourself slightly out of shape to stay desirable, likable, acceptable. None of it was malicious, it was learned, it was survival in a world that rewards visibility more than authenticity. But survival has an expiration date. There's a quiet fatigue that settles in when you've spent too long seeking permission to exist as you are. You feel it in your body first. The tightness when you speak, the hesitation before expressing a truth, the subtle anxiety of waiting to see how your words will be received. And then one day that waiting ends. You say what you mean without rehearsing. You wear what feels right without checking how it will be perceived. You step back from situations that require you to shrink or sparkle on command. And the world doesn't end. People don't vanish. Some do, yes, but the right ones stay. And more importantly, you stay with yourself. Real life examples of this are everywhere, though they're rarely celebrated. A woman leaves a career path that looks impressive but drains her, choosing work that feels aligned even if it draws less applause. A person stops posting for approval and starts living privately, fully. Someone chooses solitude over constant company because the silence finally feels honest. These choices don't come from bitterness, they come from clarity. External validation no longer fuels you because you've built an internal source. You've learned how to sit with yourself long enough to recognize your own values. You know what effort looks like when it's sincere. You know when you've shown up with integrity, even if no one claps for it. That knowledge becomes your anchor. And when you're anchored, opinions lose their power to toss you around. Criticism still stings sometimes because you're human, but it doesn't define you. Compliments still feel good, but they don't complete you. You can receive both without handing over the keys to your identity. That balance is rare, and it's earned. It's earned through disappointment, through being misunderstood, through moments when you did everything right and still weren't chosen. Those moments hurt, but they taught you something essential. Your worth cannot depend on outcomes you don't control. You begin to notice how freeing that is. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening. You stop chasing recognition from those who benefit from withholding it. You stop overgiving just to feel needed. And in that space, something unexpected happens. You become calmer, more selective, more present. Your relationships change. You no longer bond through approval seeking. You bond through honesty. You don't need constant reassurance because you trust your own emotional compass. You don't ask for permission to take up space. You offer yourself as you are, without negotiation. This doesn't make you harder. It makes you truer. And the people who connect with you now, they're not drawn to your performance. They're drawn to your presence. They feel it, the steadiness, the lack of pretense. The quiet confidence that comes from someone who doesn't need to be validated to feel whole. Neuroscience shows that when self-worth becomes internally regulated, stress responses decrease, decision-making improves, emotional resilience strengthens. You recover faster from setbacks because you're not questioning your value every time something doesn't work out. You stop asking, "What did this say about me?" And you start asking, "What did this teach me?" That shift alone can change the trajectory of a life you still care deeply, but you no longer attach your identity to how others respond to that care. You give because it's who you are, not because you're hoping it will earn you a place. And when it's not reciprocated, you don't collapse, you recalibrate. This is the quiet power of no longer being fueled by external validation. You become harder to manipulate, harder to rush, harder to guilt. You don't react to praise like it's a prize, and you don't react to silence like it's a verdict. You understand that other people's responses often reflect their own capacity, not your worth. And in that understanding, there's peace. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself. The steady kind that stays with you when no one is clapping. The kind that holds you in moments of doubt and reminds you that you don't need to be chosen to be valuable. You already are. That's why validation doesn't fuel you anymore. You found a deeper source, one that doesn't run out, one that doesn't depend on timing, attention, or approval, one that belongs to you, and no one can take it away. There was a time when everything pulled at you, every comment, every tone shift, every unanswered message. You felt it all, immediately and intensely, as if the world were constantly tapping on your shoulder, demanding a response. Silence felt like defeat. Letting something slide felt like weakness. You believed that if you didn't react, you would be overlooked, misunderstood, or diminished. So you explained, you defended, you corrected, you poured energy into moments that never intended to give anything back. And then, slowly, you began to notice the cost. Your body would tense before your mind even caught up. Your breath would shorten. Your thoughts would race, rehearsing conversations that might never happen. You were present everywhere except inside yourself. Reacting felt necessary, but it was quietly draining you. Not all at once, just enough each time to leave you a little more tired, a little less clear. Growth didn't arrive as a sudden realization. It arrived as fatigue. There comes a moment when you realize that your peace is being negotiated away in small, invisible transactions. You give it up to prove a point, to correct a misunderstanding, to show that you care, to avoid being perceived the wrong way. And one day, you pause and ask yourself a different question, not, "Am I right?" but, "Is this worth my energy?" That question changes the shape of your life. You begin to understand that reaction is often reflex, not wisdom. It's the nervous system jumping to protect something, pride, identity, belonging. But protection doesn't always require action. Sometimes it requires restraint. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain still while the world tries to provoke movement. This isn't about becoming passive. It's about becoming intentional. Real life moments make this lesson unavoidable. Someone says something designed to trigger you, and you feel the familiar surge rising. The words form quickly in your mind, sharp and ready. But instead of releasing them, you pause, you breathe. And in that pause, you realize that engaging would change nothing. It wouldn't bring understanding. It wouldn't bring peace. It would only cost you. So you let it pass. At first, this feels unnatural, almost irresponsible. You worry that silence will be misinterpreted, that boundaries need constant explanation, that letting things go means accepting them. But over time, you learn a deeper truth: not reacting doesn't mean agreeing. It means discerning. Psychology supports this shift. Emotional regulation improves when the prefrontal cortex takes the lead over the amygdala. In simple terms, wisdom begins to guide impulse. You stop living at the mercy of every emotional spark. You start choosing your battles based on meaning, not momentum. And something subtle happens when you do this. People notice, not because you announce it, but because your presence changes. You no longer jump at every invitation to conflict. You don't rush to fill silences. You don't explain yourself into exhaustion. There's a steadiness to you now, a quiet gravity. Words carry more weight because you don't spend them carelessly. You realize how often reactions used to be a form of self-defense disguised as engagement. You weren't always responding to the situation, you were responding to the fear of being misunderstood. But understanding isn't guaranteed, no matter how carefully you explain. Once you accept that you stop trying to control perception, you let people think what they think, this doesn't make you indifferent. It makes you free. There's a story many people recognize in their own lives. A message arrives late at night, loaded with accusation or guilt. You feel the old urgency to respond immediately, to clarify, to smooth things over. But instead, you put the phone down, you sleep, and in the morning, the message has lost its power. What felt urgent now feels unnecessary. What demanded reaction now feels optional. Time reveals truth. Not everything needs an answer in the moment. Some things dissolve when you stop feeding them. Some conflicts exist only because both sides keep showing up. When you step back, the fire often burns out on its own. You also learn that some people rely on your reactions to feel significant. They provoke because response validates them. When you stop providing that fuel, the dynamic changes. Not out of punishment, but out of clarity. You're no longer participating in exchanges that cost more than they give. This is especially true in close relationships. Growth teaches you that love doesn't require constant emotional availability. You can care deeply without being endlessly accessible. You can hold space for others without abandoning your own. You start responding instead of reacting. Response is slower. It listens. It considers. It comes from alignment rather than urgency. A reaction is automatic. A response is chosen. And choice is where power lives. Neuroscience shows that pauses, literal seconds between stimulus and action, reduce emotional hijacking. That space allows you to act in accordance with your values instead of your triggers. Over time, this practice reshapes your emotional landscape. You feel less scattered, less pulled, more centered. You notice the difference in your body. Your shoulders relax more often. Your jaw unclenches. Your breath deepens. You're not bracing for impact anymore because you're not engaging in unnecessary battles. There's a quiet confidence that grows from this restraint. You trust yourself to handle what truly matters. You don't panic at every challenge because you've learned that urgency is often an illusion. True importance doesn't scream, it waits. This changes how you listen. Instead of preparing a rebuttal, you actually hear what's being said and what isn't. You recognize projection when it appears. You see insecurity disguised as criticism. You understand that other people's emotional storms don't require you to get wet. And perhaps the most important realization arrives gently, almost unnoticed. Your peace is not fragile. It doesn't need to be defended constantly. It doesn't shatter because someone misunderstands you. It doesn't disappear because you chose silence over explanation. Peace becomes something internal, self-sustaining. You carry it with you instead of guarding it from the outside world. You stop proving, stop persuading, stop performing emotional labor for situations that don't deserve it. And when you do speak, it's intentional, measured, true. Your words come from a place of clarity, not reaction. They land differently because they aren't rushed or reactive. They're rooted. You haven't become colder. You've become clearer. You haven't lost your voice. You've refined it. Not everything deserves a reaction because not everything deserves your energy. And learning that isn't withdrawal, it's wisdom. There was a time when joy needed witnesses, when happiness felt real only if it was shared, announced, reacted to. Laughter was louder then. Smiles were bigger. Moments were captured quickly, almost desperately, as if proof was required. You chased feelings that came with a rush, excitement, thrill, intensity, because they made you feel alive in a way that was immediate and undeniable. Joy back then was something that surged through you like a spark and burned bright for a moment before fading. And when it faded, you looked for the next spark. Over time, though, something began to shift, not suddenly, not dramatically, just a subtle change in how your body responded to the world. The things that once made your heart race no longer had the same effect. You still smiled, still laughed, but it wasn't the same kind of noise. It was quieter, slower. At first, you wondered if you were losing your joy, if life was somehow becoming duller or heavier. But what was really happening was depth. Joy was no longer something you chased. It was something you recognized. When joy becomes deeper, it stops needing performance. It doesn't ask for applause or validation. It doesn't rush in and out of your life. It settles. It stays. It becomes less about moments that spike your emotions and more about a steady sense of rightness in your body. You feel it when you wake up without dread, when your shoulders aren't tight for no reason, when silence doesn't scare you. Neuroscience tells us that this kind of joy is rooted in serotonin and oxytocin, not dopamine. Dopamine chases. It wants more. It thrives on novelty and reward. Serotonin and oxytocin are quieter. They come from safety, connection, and meaning. They don't shout. They hum. And once your nervous system learns that hum, it doesn't crave the noise the same way anymore. You begin to find joy in places you once overlooked. A slow morning, a familiar song that feels like home instead of hype, sitting with someone without needing to fill the space. These moments don't explode with excitement, but they anchor you. They don't drain you afterward. They don't leave you searching for the next high. Real life examples of this appear everywhere, though they rarely make headlines. A person who once needed constant plans now enjoys an evening alone, not out of loneliness, but contentment. Someone who used to document every happy moment now keeps them private, letting them exist without being shaped for an audience. A woman who once chased intense relationships now feels deeply fulfilled in a steady one, even if it looks ordinary from the outside. Ordinary becomes sacred when you stop running from yourself. Loud joy often hides something, a need to prove happiness, a fear of stillness, a belief that if joy isn't obvious, it doesn't count. But deeper joy doesn't argue for its existence. It doesn't compare itself to others. It simply is. You notice how you no longer feel the need to exaggerate your emotions. When something good happens, you don't rush to broadcast it. You let it sink in. You allow yourself to feel it fully instead of turning it into content or conversation. The moment belongs to you. That ownership changes everything. Psychologists talk about this as internalized well-being, the ability to experience positive emotion without external reinforcement. It's a sign of emotional maturity, not emotional loss. Children express joy loudly because it's new and overwhelming. Adults who are healed express joy quietly because it's integrated. This quiet joy doesn't mean life is perfect. You still feel sadness. You still face stress. But joy isn't fragile anymore. It isn't something that disappears the moment life becomes difficult. It coexists with pain instead of being erased by it. You might be going through challenges and still feel okay at your core, not happy in the surface sense, but steady, resilient, grounded. That steadiness is joy that has learned how to survive. There's a moment when you realize that excitement used to exhaust you. The emotional spikes, the late nights, the constant stimulation, they took more than they gave. Deeper joy, on the other hand, restores you. You feel more like yourself afterward, not less. You become more selective with how you spend your time and energy because you recognize what feeds this quieter happiness and what disrupts it. You choose environments that feel safe, people who feel calm, conversations that feel honest. You don't need fireworks to feel connected anymore. And when something genuinely joyful happens, it lands differently. It doesn't send you into chaos. It doesn't overwhelm your system. It integrates into your life naturally, like it belongs there. You don't fear losing it because it doesn't feel borrowed. This kind of joy also changes how you relate to others' happiness. You stop comparing. You stop measuring your life against highlight reels. You don't feel behind because you understand that joy isn't linear or loud. It doesn't follow a script. You see someone celebrating loudly and feel genuinely happy for them without questioning your own life. You see someone else moving quietly and recognize that both expressions are valid. Your joy no longer needs to compete. There's strength in that. Sociological studies show that people who prioritize meaning over pleasure report higher life satisfaction over time. Meaning is quieter than pleasure, but it lasts longer. It builds a foundation instead of a spike. When joy deepens, it often aligns with meaning, purpose, values, connection. You feel this when you do something aligned with who you are, even if no one notices. Helping someone without recognition. Creating something because it matters to you. Resting because your body needs it, not because you earned it. Joy becomes something you practice, not something you chase. You may still enjoy excitement. You may still laugh loudly sometimes, but it's no longer the baseline. It's an addition, not a requirement. You don't feel empty without it. You don't fear quiet days. Quiet days become nourishment. There's a profound freedom in realizing that your happiness doesn't need to be dramatic to be real, that you don't have to be constantly stimulated to feel alive, that peace isn't boring, it's spacious. Deeper joy allows you to be present, truly present. You're not rushing through moments to get to the next one. You're not multitasking your way through life. You're here, in your body, in your breath, in the small details that once passed unnoticed. You notice light differently. You listen more closely. You feel gratitude without forcing it. This is not the joy of youth that burns fast and bright. This is the joy of wisdom that glows steadily. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't fade when no one is watching. It lives in you now, and it's enough. There was a time when stillness felt dangerous, when being alone with your thoughts felt like standing in an empty room with the lights off, unsure of what might be waiting for you in the corners. You stayed busy then. You filled your days and nights with noise, people, plans, screens, anything that kept your mind moving forward and away from itself. Distraction wasn't a habit, it was a shield. As long as something else demanded your attention, you didn't have to sit with the questions that quietly followed you. And you didn't even realize you were running. You told yourself you were living. Running doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like productivity. Sometimes it looks like social calendars that are always full, relationships that are always intense, goals stacked on top of goals with no space in between. Motion becomes proof of purpose. Exhaustion becomes a badge of honor. And in that constant movement, you convince yourself that if you just keep going, you'll eventually outrun the discomfort you don't have words for. But discomfort has patience. It waits for the moments when the noise dies down, late at night, early in the morning, in the spaces between plans. It shows up as restlessness, as a vague sense of dissatisfaction, as a feeling that something inside you is being ignored. You push it aside at first. You tell yourself you're fine, that this is normal, that everyone feels this way. Then one day the running stops, not because you planned it, but because you can't keep going the same way anymore. The distractions lose their power. The endless stimulation stops working. The things that once helped you escape now feel hollow. You find yourself alone, not dramatically, not tragically, just present. And for the first time, there's nowhere else to go. That's when you meet yourself. At first, it's uncomfortable. You notice thoughts you've been avoiding, emotions you postponed, old patterns you never questioned because you were too busy reacting to life to reflect on it. You see how often you sought external noise to drown out internal truth. How many choices were made to avoid feeling instead of to honor yourself. This moment can feel heavy, but it's also honest. Psychology tells us that avoidance is one of the most common coping mechanisms humans use to manage unresolved emotions. It works temporarily, but long-term avoidance doesn't eliminate pain, it postpones it. And postponed pain doesn't disappear, it accumulates. It waits until you're ready, or until you have no choice but to be. You've reached the point where you're ready. You sit with yourself now, not perfectly, not always comfortably, but willingly. You allow silence without rushing to fill it. You notice your thoughts without immediately judging or suppressing them. You let feelings rise and fall without panicking. This isn't weakness, it's strength, because running from yourself takes energy, a lot of it. It requires constant effort to maintain distractions, to manage appearances, to avoid looking too closely. When you stop running, that energy comes back to you, and you begin to understand why you were so tired before. You start to recognize patterns that once controlled you, the relationships you entered to avoid loneliness rather than to build connection, the habits you leaned on to numb discomfort, the roles you played because they felt safer than being fully seen. Seeing these patterns doesn't fill you with shame anymore. It fills you with clarity. You understand that you did what you knew how to do at the time. You were surviving, and survival was necessary then, but survival is not the same as living. Now you give yourself permission to feel things fully. Sadness doesn't scare you as much, neither does uncertainty. You realize that emotions are not threats, they are signals, information, guides pointing toward what needs attention, healing, or change. Neuroscience supports this shift. When we stop suppressing emotions and allow ourselves to process them, the brain's stress response decreases. Emotional awareness strengthens regulation. In simple terms, feeling your feelings actually makes them more manageable. You begin to trust this process. Instead of reaching for distraction, the moment discomfort appears, you pause, you breathe, you ask yourself what's really being asked of you in that moment. Rest, boundaries, honesty, change. These answers come quietly, but they come clearly when you listen. You also start to enjoy your own company in a way you never did before. Alone no longer means lonely. It means spacious. You can spend time with yourself without needing constant input. A walk without headphones, a meal without scrolling, an evening without plans. In those moments, you feel something new, groundedness. This groundedness changes how you show up in the world. You're no longer seeking people to complete you or situations to distract you. You choose from a place of fullness rather than lack. You engage because you want to, not because you're trying to escape something inside yourself. Relationships shift as a result. You're more honest, more selective, less willing to tolerate dynamics that require you to abandon yourself. You don't disappear into others the way you once did. You remain present with who you are, even in connection. And if a relationship can't hold that truth, you let it go, not with drama, but with understanding. This is what it means to stop running from yourself. You stop outsourcing your sense of identity. You stop using motion as a mask. You stop fearing stillness. You realize that the parts of you you were avoiding weren't enemies. They were unacknowledged, unheard, waiting. And when you finally turn toward them, they soften. You begin to integrate your experiences instead of compartmentalizing them. Past mistakes become lessons rather than wounds. Regrets become information rather than chains. You don't rewrite your history, you understand it. There's a quiet confidence that grows from this self-acceptance. Not the kind that needs to announce itself, the kind that stays steady when things are uncertain. You trust yourself to handle discomfort because you've already faced it. You no longer need constant reassurance from the world. You're not searching for something to fill a void. You've learned how to sit with that void, understand it, and eventually realize it wasn't empty, it was space. Space to become who you actually are. Life doesn't suddenly become easy when you stop running from yourself. Challenges still come, loss still hurts, uncertainty still exists, but you meet these experiences differently now. You don't flee, you don't numb, you stay. And staying present, honest, grounded is the bravest thing you've ever done. You didn't lose momentum, you gained direction. You didn't slow down because you were afraid. You slowed down because you were ready. You stopped running because you finally realized there was nothing inside you worth escaping from. So if nothing excites you anymore, don't panic. You didn't lose your spark. You refined it. You didn't become cold. You became clear. This is what feminine maturity looks like. Calm over chaos, depth over drama, peace over performance. And once you reach this place, only what's real will ever move you again.